I think we started quite differently, right? If you hear the story about how Tony started, we started with a problem, and then we've focused on that problem. Then we've probably built a commercial framework about it, behind it, and what a lot of companies are now trying to do is find a purpose and thread that into their, into their commercial model. So we are coming at it very differently, but ultimately, if you break it down, we're making delicious, great-looking taste. I think it's the best tasting chocolate. There's everything that we do, we try and limit our impact everywhere.
Hey Ben, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Peter. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. A real pleasure to have you on the podcast. I'm really looking forward to this one. Where we kind of normally start is to dive in a little bit more about the person. So maybe start by telling me a little bit more about Ben.
All right, Ben, I'm 44 years old. I'm having to start to think of myself now as like a middle-aged man, which I'm still getting to terms with. And I live in Weybridge, and I'm a big fan of Portsmouth Football Club, which is kind of where I grew up. And yeah, and then I probably think I have the best job in the world as well. So, and my official title at Tony's, where I'm, I suppose, unofficially the MD, UK MD for Ireland, is Lord Chocolonely the Third.
Is it?
So
what a title.
That's a little bit about me.
So talking about Tony's, can you maybe kind of start a little bit more about the journey that Tony's have been on? Because it's quite an interesting tale.
Yeah, it definitely is. And whenever I kind of talk to people about it and talk at events, which we do a lot of, because we're all about raising awareness of what we do and why we do, I call it the story of an unusual chocolate bar. So Tony's Chocolonely, we were started back in 2005, so just 16, 17 years ago now, in the Netherlands. So we're a Dutch company off the back of a TV program. So there were 3 Dutch journalists who were, my Dutch pronunciation is terrible. It's called Keuken&nbsp van Waarde, and I do apologise to any Dutch people out there, because my Dutch colleagues always laugh at my pronunciation, but I figure, give it a go, right? So it might not be the best pronunciation, but that basically means food unwrapped or food uncovered. And these 3 Dutch journalists would look at food claims, brand claims, marketing claims. One of those journalists is called Teun van der Keuken. Teun, the international translation for Teun is Tony. And he was sitting at his kitchen table one Sunday, leafing through the papers, and Teun came across on page 8. There was this article on cocoa farms and cocoa farming, and it basically said that there's just shy of 2 million. This is back then. There's just shy of 2 million children in those days working on cocoa farms illegally in West Africa, where most of the world's cocoa comes from. And there's also really high instances of modern-day slavery. And the root cause of all these problems is poverty, because the farmers aren't getting paid enough. And a couple of things struck Teun, or from now on we're going to call him Tony, because it's easier. A couple of things struck him. The first thing was how can this be happening in today's age, right? And this is going back now nearly 2 decades, but how can this be happening? And then also, why is this? If this is happening, why is this on page 8? Why is everyone not talking about this? The fact that you've got millions of kids working illegally on cocoa farms, making chocolate for us in the Western world to enjoy. So that struck him as really, really odd, and he wanted to do something about it. So they made a program on it. Take a step back. If you think of the cocoa industry it's kind of like an hourglass on its side. On one hand, so on one side you've got people like you and me, and you've got billions of consumers who love eating chocolate, don't really think about where it's coming from. And then on the other side, at the beginning of the value chain, you have most of the world's cocoa coming from 2 countries, Ghana and the Ivory Coast. So over 60% of the world's cocoa comes from those 2 countries in West Africa. And there you've got 2.5 million farms, smallholder farms and family farms and plantations that were basically, all of the cocoa is grown. And those are typically farms that are maybe 2 or 3 football pitches, a couple of hectares. And then in the middle, and this is the pinch point, you've got a handful of big, or maybe two handfuls of big chocolate companies, the big brand owners that you kind of know, the Mondelez, Mars, Nestle, Hershey, Ferrero, Lindt, and then two or three big producers who processors who process most of the cocoa, like Callebaut, Cargill, and Olam. And basically, because the companies in the middle keep the price of cocoa as low as possible so they can make as much money as possible, it leads to massive structural problems. And the root cause of all the issues are basically the small prices that the farmers get paid ultimately leads to poverty. And then those farmers have to then take their children out of school and use them on their farms. So there's now, to this day, still 1.6 million kids working illegally on cocoa farms in West Africa. So nothing's basically changed in those last 20 years. And so Teun and his two journalist friends found this out, and they were like, wow, that's not cool. We want to do something about this. And 4 years prior to that, there was something called the Harkin-Engel Protocol, where two congressmen in the US, one called Senator Harkin, Senator Engel, they rightly reasoned that, okay, if there's a handful of these big companies, then we can get them to do something about it, because they control the flow of the cocoa, they control the pricing. And that's exactly what they did in 2001. They got all the big chocolate companies around a table, and they agreed to rid their value chains from all of the issues with slavery and child labour, and signed an agreement back in 2001. But unfortunately, that was a non-binding agreement. So you fast forward 4 years, and Teun was there saying, okay, well, what's been done about it? We're basically coming to the end of this agreement. There was a 5-year timeline on it. I want to know what progress has been done. So Tony phoned up all of the big chocolate companies. He flew out to Lake Geneva to the kind of fancy headquarters at Nestle. And he said, what progress are you making? What are you doing about it? Basically, long story short, no one would talk to him. And if they did, they were not taking responsibility. It's too complex, we can't do it. And it's kind of an issue that's just not going to go away. So for Tony, that wasn't enough. So he decided, actually, that if he was to make a stand and make a point, then he would effectively try and send himself to jail. So he filmed himself as part of the program, eating a load of chocolate from the big chocolate companies. And he then phoned the police and said, look, I know that there's problems, and then I know where it's coming from, and therefore by eating this chocolate from the big companies, I'm knowingly financing slavery and child labour, so you've got to come and arrest me. And this is on a film called The Chocolate Case, which was made back in 2016, about the kind of where Tony started. But the police hung up on him because they're like, okay, yeah, nice one, prank caller. But he didn't stop there. He then took matters a stage further. So he hired a lawyer, and he prosecuted himself for the same crime. And he flew out to West Africa, and he found 3 former child slaves, and he got them to testify against him. And one of them flew back into Amsterdam and basically stood up, testified against him, and the court case went on for 2 years. Off the back of the court case, Tony didn't go to jail. The judge said that morally you're right, and this shouldn't be happening, but I can't draw a link between the cocoa that you have eaten and the cocoa that these boys have been forced to produce. And also, if I make an example of you, it's going to set a terrible precedent for everyone else in the Netherlands. And they love chocolate almost as much as we do in the UK, but not quite as much. And so off the back of it, Tony made a bright red bar in the total opposite wrapper that anything else was out there. All the chocolate in the Netherlands at the time, the milk chocolate was kind of a bluey purple. And he made that as a bit of a PR stunt to kind of like raise awareness and try and demonstrate that chocolate could be made differently. And he called it Tony's Chocolonely, and that's important. Tony, because that's his name, or the international translation of Teun, and Chocolonely, because it's obviously chocolate, and then it's Tony at the time who was fighting the lonely battle to change the cocoa industry from within. Didn't really think much of it, but those bars sold out in hours, a few thousand bars. And actually, at that stage, we took the decision that, look, if we're really serious about changing the chocolate industry, the best way isn't through, we're not a charity or an NGO, is showing that a business can make delicious tasting chocolate using different sourcing principles that doesn't involve exploiting West African communities, and ultimately act as an example for all those other big chocolate companies to raise their game. And that is what we've been doing now since 2015. So 16, 17 years, and we've now grown to the number one chocolate brand in the Netherlands, and we ultimately want to show that there's a different way to make chocolate. And so we raise awareness of the issue, the stuff that I've just talked to you about. We lead by example through our 5 sourcing principles, which I can touch on, because I'm going to give my voice a rest, because I realise I've talked a lot. And then ultimately, we want to inspire other companies to act. And we want to inspire companies to act, but we want to inspire consumers to act. And ultimately, we want to give people a choice. We want them to be aware. And once they know, they can't unknow. And then via Tony's and some other ethical brands out there who do things in slightly different ways, we will change the chocolate industry for the better, and ultimately move away from the fact that there shouldn't be 1.6 million kids working illegally on cocoa farms. And we say to those big chocolate companies, this is how we do it. Copy our sourcing principles, copy our business model, because it can be done, and we're proving it can be done.
Yeah, exactly. And you're proving it, like actually following a impact-led, missions-based, goal focus, that, success doesn't have to be to the detriment of profit, because like I saw recently that you went over the 100 million revenue mark for the first time. And I see you recently acquired like new places in Belgium, for example, and you're building something in Amsterdam. You seem to be going from strength to strength. But, we did talk about like slavery and the issues that are very apparent within the industry. It's important to kind of look into these challenges in a little bit more detail, because I remember reading on your website that the chocolate industry has a child labour rate of 46.5%. And looking at recent articles, for example, in the Times, they reported back in 2021 that 1,701 children were working within Tony's supply chain. Now, this is an important thing, because I guess like what you're doing versus what others aren't is like you're leaning into the challenge, and you're identifying it.
Yeah, definitely. I think the first thing you have to do is admit there's a problem, because if you are sourcing cocoa in West Africa, if you, as you rightly say, one in 2 households in cocoa growing communities will have an instance of child labour on the farm. So the first thing to do is admit that it's there, because it is there. We publish absolutely everything we do in our annual FAIR report. So this gets published around about November, December each year. The Times article you referenced actually was from February this year, so about 3 months after we published this. And it's not a surprise to us. One of our 5 sourcing principles is we have a fully traceable supply chain, because only if you are taking responsibility for where your cocoa is coming from can you look to find problems and actively remediate them. So that's the first thing. It's not hiding behind some opaque supply chain and a big faceless pile of beans. You actually have to take ownership and accountability. So we have a fully traceable supply chain, and that enables us to visit all the farms and all the farming communities and actively look for problems and encourage people to report them, because if people are scared to report them, they're just going to go underground. And they can be remediated and they can be solved, and they can be solved in the right way. A lot of it will come down to, people not having, for example, birth certificates. And so we will act and give them birth certificates, or give them access to get to school, so they would give them bicycles through our foundation. But the first thing is to admit that there's a problem there. Last year, we found just 374 cases. This year, as we've grown, we've onboarded 2 new co-ops. And on the cooperatives that we've been working with for a period of time, the prevalence rate for child labour, because we actively find it and remediate it, is 3.9%. On the new co-ops that we onboarded, the 2 new co-ops, it runs at about 50%, which is the average within the industry. And so that's where that additional 1,400 cases came from. 2 new co-ops, 1,400 cases. Ultimately, over the time, we work with those co-ops, we bring it down, we educate them, we train them, and that is how you will solve the issue. But to us, it's not a surprise. We publish this every year. I suppose the interesting thing is that it makes the headlines, because I think a paper will pick up on it and talk about it. But for us, we publish everything that we do. I think we account for about 0.4% of all of the cocoa that comes from West Africa. So That's great. If we can take responsibility for it, then everyone can. But we need that other kind of 99% to start facing into their responsibilities and admitting there are problems and actively doing something about it. But we're very open about this, and we publish everything, because honestly, if you don't do that, and if you're not transparent and you're not looking for the problem and you're denying it's there, then you're kidding yourself.
Yeah, I think one of the key challenges as well within the industry is actually looking at the root causes. And when I talk about like root causes, you mentioned the issues in respect to like labour, and leading to, farmers are often forced to like have their children working on their plantations because they don't have sufficient funds to pay the labour fee. I think one of the things that interested me the most when I dived into the work that you do and what others do is that of Farmgate price, and how that is set per tonne, and the impact that has, and how you as a brand have taken it further than simply like Farmgate and fair trade, and you've actually gone towards a Tony premium. But I guess to a lot of people listening to this is just terminology, so it's probably easier to break that down to allow people to understand the true challenge that you face and why you're doing the work around Turners Premium.
Yeah. I mean, you've got to go back, as you rightly touched on, the root cause of all the problems. And no matter what any of the big companies will say, they will say it's not about price. We know the root cause of the issues on cocoa farms in West Africa and child labour and slavery. The root cause is poverty. And so for us and everyone else, price is the key fertilizer. And we work backwards from enabling the farmers that we work with to earn a living income. So they get fluctuations in the market, but the thing is, the farmer has to earn a certain amount per kilo of cocoa, or per tonne of cocoa, depending on the size of their farms. And that's really important. So the root cause of all the issues is poverty. And so it starts with the price. And so one of our 5 sourcing principles, we have a fully traceable supply chain. One of the other ones, and really important, is a fair price for the cocoa. So you have, if you take the Ivory Coast, for example, you have the Farmgate price, and then the Farmgate price is the price that's set by the government, and that changes every year. And that broadly in Ivory Coast is about $1,000 for a tonne of cocoa. On top of that, what we do, if you look on the back of a bar of Tony's, you'll see the Fair Trade logo. And for us, Fair Trade is a good start. It doesn't go far enough. One of the good things about Fair Trade is it guarantees a premium. And I can talk a little bit more about premiums and mass balance, but all of the Fair Trade cocoa traded is effectively, it comes from a big pile, it's mass balance. And for us, we want to go further, which is why we have the traceable element. But we then pay the Fair Trade premium because we think it's great. They only work with co-ops. It empowers the farmers. They get the money. They get $240 a tonne on top of the Farmgate price of $1,000. And they're free to do what they want with it. It guarantees a premium, and they can do whatever they want with it, which is why we like Fair Trade. But then we go further. So we pay about a further $380 a tonne on top of that. And that is the Tony's premium. And that premium goes direct to the farmers that we work with. It goes direct to the co-ops. And again, we're not telling them what to do with the money. They can invest that in the community. We'd love to see a larger percentage of it. About 60% of it goes direct to the farmers. Probably about 40% at the moment is going to the wider communities. That's effectively what we do. If you look at our P&L and all our details on our balance sheet, all of our numbers are in here. It means that typically about 7% of our annual revenue, net revenue, is going back into premiums and what we would call impact premiums in West Africa. So last year, it's well over 8 million. So it's a sizable amount, but actually, if you break it down, it's not a massive amount. It's a choice, right? We just cut our P&L slightly differently, and if we can do it, we don't have the most efficient supply chain. We don't probably get the clout that all of the big guys do, but we're showing it can be done. But ultimately, it does start with a fair price. So you have the Farmgate price, which is $1,000 a tonne. And then you have the premium on top of that, which is the Fair Trade premium. And then on top of that, we pay the additional Tony's premium.
Yeah, and if you look at widely why a lot of poverty, like at the moment, you read things like Oxfam's Inequality Kills report, or you look at the case even in the UK with respect to the increasing poverty. Like the crux to a lot of the challenge behind poverty is paying people a real living wage. So when you look at the work that you've done in around the Ivory Coast, it's building up towards a real living wage. And if you're able to pay people a real living wage, they're able to like support themselves, support their livelihood, support the work that they do. And you see a reduction in poverty as a whole. I think what you are doing is admirable, and I think hopefully you're showing others within the industry that it doesn't have to be a set way.
Yeah, and look, we're not. We do say for us, profit is never a goal. It's a means to achieving a goal. Even the chocolate that we make isn't a goal. It's kind of just a vehicle to spread the word. What we do isn't crazy. We just think we're paying a fair price, and that isn't actually a massive amount to pay a fair price for the cocoa, that we're sourcing. But I think we started quite differently, right? If you hear the story about how Tony started, we started with a problem, and then we've focused on that problem. Then we've probably built a commercial framework about it, behind it, and what a lot of companies are now trying to do is find a purpose and thread that into their into their commercial model. So we are coming at it very differently, but ultimately, if you break it down, we're making delicious, great looking taste. I think it's the best tasting chocolate. There's everything that we do, we try and limit our impact everywhere. So we're by no means perfect, but there's no palm oil, there's no plastic. Our sugar's fair trade. We offset all of our carbon emissions. We'd love to go further. We only use natural ingredients. We give 1% of our revenue goes to foundation on top of the foundation as well, which is it's like a charity, a separate part. But I mean, ultimately, we're doing it, and so we think other people can do it as well. The power sits with the consumers. The power sits with shareholders, but the people we need to get to change are the big chocolate companies who are making billions, sadly, at the expense of people less fortunate at the beginning of the value chain.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if you start looking at inequality, inhumanity and injustice, it kind of leads us on a little bit more towards what your campaigns and the wrapper campaign you did in the early part of this year.
Yeah, we don't spend a massive amount on marketing, and we typically have had a no paid media policy because we can't and then we always go through this internally in our business. Is this right? Is this wrong? And it's like this big circular conversation happens every year. But we've got to the number one market share position in the Netherlands on the back of a great product and the story and people actually feeling compelled to, once they know, to make a change. And I think, but fundamentally, that is a great tasting bar of chocolate, and that's why you buy a bar of chocolate. But in a world where we have a no paid media policy, and we're trying to compete with the big chocolate companies, we have to kind of do things slightly antagonistic, and one of our values is outspoken. So a few of our campaigns, I think the campaign that I like the most that we did was 2 years ago now, which was our Sweet Solutions campaign. And we are always told by the big chocolate companies that they can't do what we do because it's we're small and we're not buying much cocoa and it's complicated and all of that stuff. And that's why we have to scale, because we have to show that what we're doing is replicable. That's why we use Barry Callebaut, who all of the big chocolate companies use. And there are problems and limitations with that, but Barry Callebaut are one of the big processors of cocoa. And so they do have problems, but we have a fully separated supply chain in there. And we have to use them because the other guys use them. And we want to show that what we do can be scaled. We decided about 2 years ago that what we'd do is if those big companies couldn't make chocolate the way we wanted them to, we'd make their chocolate our way. So I wish I had the wrappers here, but maybe we'll find the visuals. It's called our Sweet Solutions campaign, and we effectively ran quite close to the wind. We said, well, if you can't do it, we'll do it for you. So we made a well-known, what looked like a, let's say, Twix bar, a Kit Kat bar, a Ferrero bar, and a Toblerone bar. They look very similar, but they were very much Tony's. And the flavours underneath it were the same flavours or very similar, but using our chocolate and our sourcing principles. And we even made the bars look a little bit like a nod to the kind of their bars as well. And we launched those, and we said, well, look, we'll do it for you. And so we showed, and it caused quite a stir. And actually in the UK, they got taken off shelves. I won't name the retailer that we launched with, but it was great that we got their support. But after a day, I think they had so much heat from the big chocolate companies that we sadly took them off sale. But it was great coverage for the brand, right? And it was one of those things that you look at and you're like, Christ, is this a sensible thing to do? But ultimately, you've got to do things differently, because otherwise we fail to get noticed and we don't get the word out there. So we do sail a little bit close to the wind. But I think that was a fantastic campaign that I think everyone at Tony's is just really proud of. And it's nice that you can come to work and you can be a bit risque and take those risks and do things that other companies won't do, because you've got that mission central to everything you do, and that probably makes you do crazy stuff, but it also keeps you pretty grounded and focused.
Yeah, that's the thing about like movements, and in my eyes and my experience, it's always, if you're able to create movements that are built behind a cause, then you can really galvanize momentum behind people both inside the company and externally to your customer base, because they align to these like disruptive brands. Because like if you look at what's taking place at the moment, like people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So it's ultimately, people want to see and align themselves more with brands that they believe in and trust, rather than kind of have a continuation of the status quo. And I think only by doing things differently can you see change within the sector that you're within. And, you do mention the challenges that you've had historically, like with Barry Callebaut. If you look at what like they work with all the big companies, and they have their own problems internally. But when you do go to scale, I think one of the things that you'll get is you'll probably get a lot of heat with respect to, why are you working with these guys? But you can't subsequently go to scale without working with them. And subsequently to that, you can't also change those companies and change their practices without starting the conversation and without starting like real legitimate work. So I think a lot of it comes down to the partnerships that you build and the collaboration that you can create from a good place of authenticity. So talking of collaborations, I'm really intrigued to some of the work that you've done with like Brewdog, for example, or Body Shop.
Yeah, we look for like-minded companies that kind of share our values, that we feel ultimately can help us get the message out there, and by using different means and different partnerships and what have you. So we're always on the lookout for like-minded companies. I think there's definitely one where we have to be really careful, because obviously we put ourselves out there as a company that's trying to do the right thing. So we will only try and associate with companies that are also trying to do the right thing and go much further in their fields as well, and hopefully pioneers. Now, we haven't always got it right. I think when we did the Brewdog collaboration, and look, this was great, right? It was this bar actually, this white raspberry and popping candy, which is this is our only white bar in the UK, but people go mad for it. It's got like a really kind of intense flavour, but people that love it just really love it. And so Brewdog were like, yeah, we would love to brew a beer, and they gave a percentage of all the profits of the sale to our foundation, our charity. So for us, that was a bit of a no-brainer. But about 3 weeks after that launched, there was the massive scandal about working practices in Brewdog. And so we were like, shit, oh God, we couldn't have seen it coming. And it was the perfect collaboration. And it's a great product. So they launched the white chocolate raspberry popping candy flavored IPA, and it's really nice. It's quite sweet, it's quite intense, but that was a really good collaboration it's brought Tony's to more people. But again, rightly so, we couldn't have seen that coming, but obviously we get a bit of flack off the back of that, which we totally take. Yeah, we're always looking for those partnerships where we can do things differently. And then every year we have our fair, or we call it, it's like fun fair, but we call it an unfair. And we have that in Amsterdam. And a couple of years ago, before COVID, we had 5,000 consumers who paid to come and listen to us talk about what we do. And also we bring the best farmers over, we celebrate the farmers, and we launch our fair report, we talk about the good stuff, we talk about the bad stuff, the stuff we need to do more of during the day, and then we have a few beers in the evening. And it's nice. I think when you go over to the Netherlands and you see, you can't avoid Tony's, it's everywhere. I think we've got like 98% coverage, and we've got, I don't know, 5 of the best 10 selling chocolate bars, but that's what we need to replicate everywhere, because then if we can do that in my market in the UK and Ireland, in my counterpart Nikki's market in Germany and Austria and Switzerland, and then Dusan in the US, if we can do it in those big markets, then we've covered off a big part of the cocoa buying population, and it's also the home of all of the big chocolate companies. So that's why we need to replicate that kind of hype and experience, so that hopefully, Peter, in 5 years' time, when you're walking around doing your shopping, you're like, Tony's is everywhere, and then you know that hopefully we've changed things, and we've got more cocoa going back that's fairly traded, but also we've started those conversations with those big chocolate companies to adopt our 5 sourcing principles, and ultimately, do all those things that they need to be doing to take more responsibility for the cocoa that they're buying.
Yeah, I think it's about the story, right? So when you start with what you guys do and trying to be 100% slave free, I think my wife was the person that introduced me to your brand, and then I dug into a little bit more.
She's a lady with good taste.
She is a lady with good taste. So I dug into it a little bit more, and I was really encouraged by the story, so that's why I wanted to have you on the podcast. But I think if you kind of look about trying to do things differently, I think one of the things that people have to understand about brands and companies trying to do things totally different to the norm is, don't strive towards perfection. Like, you are going to get things wrong, but the important part of any change is holding your hands up when you get things right, and also when you get things wrong. So that BrewDog partnership, take it with a pinch of salt. Like, at the end of the day, you were trying things from a good place, and it didn't work. But what is real about that is the fact that there's more transparency on your brand. There's more transparency on BrewDog in respect to the work that they have to do, and transparency is key to the entirety of your process. So if you look at the juggernauts within chocolate, over time, they'll look to what you're doing. They'll see that you've made you've broken the 100 million revenue barrier, and they'll realize that actually over time, impact is the very essence of purpose, and profit doesn't have to be impacted by the purpose of your organization. It's symbiotic. It can come together. And I think when we're able to look more towards these larger goals, these really problematic things that we're truly well aware of, such as poverty, there are ways to alleviate poverty, but it starts with the root cause, and it starts with change and the ability to galvanize movements both inside an organization and out towards a common cause. Because when you do that, people become engaged with your brand. They're willing to accept that you may not get things right every single time, but they're more likely to align with your purpose and your beliefs and your goals.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. I think we're not perfect. We've worked on our business model over the last 17 years now, and we do open ourselves up, and we invite criticism. And I found this hard coming into the business 4 years ago, because I think sometimes you get quite defensive, because you're like, well, hang on a minute, can't you see all this? But everyone's got a different opinion on things, and we've just got to have strength of conviction that we're doing the right stuff. But also, if if someone points something out to us, we're not wedded to it. We'll adapt on it if we think that is going to help us get to our mission further and make all chocolate worldwide free of slavery and child labour. Then we'd be crazy to. But we're certainly not perfect by any means. But we feel that actually, we have to push boundaries. We have to do things differently to get people to sit up and take notice. But 89% of people who like and buy Tony's buy it because it tastes delicious, or they like the packaging. Only 11% are buying us because of the mission. And sometimes you're like, oh God, that I would maybe love it to be a bit more, or get more people in solely for the mission. But at the end of the day, right, it doesn't matter. People buy chocolate because they love it and it tastes great. So however we bring them in, whatever they see, if they then find out about the mission because they open a bar of chocolate and they read the wrapper, And then they wonder why that bar is unequally divided. And the bar is unequally divided because it tells the story of the unequal nature of the cocoa industry. So that's why we make our bar all different shapes and sizes, and it annoys the hell out of people. And if you go on Ocado, we are, I think, the only chocolate bar on there with 5-star reviews. But still, it breaks my heart when people go, I love it, it's delicious, I love, there's no plastic, there's no palm oil, but why are they making the bar this crazy shape? I can't share it with anyone. And so we've had to put it on some of our wrappers in the UK to this one, here's a good example. So this one, why is our bar unequally divided? The bar is unequally divided because the cocoa industry is unequally divided. So as long as the cocoa industry is unequal, we will continue to make our bars that way. So,
and I remember you doing that with like the advent calendar, right? And the purpose behind that was legitimate. You had like, that was the reason why you wanted to create an advent calendar. But then when people go and, was it like door 8 or whatever? When people go and open door 8, there's no chocolate inside, and the little kid's just like, oh, where's my chocolate? But the purpose behind what you're trying to achieve, like this is a whole thing about you're not going to get it right every time, and you shouldn't be expected to get it right every time. But the key to like change, any lasting change, is to reflect and learn along the journey, and learn what, and take on board the criticism, take on board positive aspects, but ultimately go and try and grow and develop an industry that's going to be for the betterment of everybody.
Yeah, I totally forgot about the countdown calendar. That was we took the chocolate out of day 8. The day later, there were 2 chocolates, and then actually in day 24 there were 2 chocolates. So net, anyone buying the calendar was winning versus what we said on the packaging, and the ethos, the thinking was, it's unequal. The chocolate industry is unequal. There's not a chocolate there. But then there were 2 later. But we could definitely have done more to probably signpost what we'd done, because people thought this is an outrage. This is an outrage. And then when they found out we did it delivery, there was it particularly got to, I think the Daily Mail picked up on it, and it made the BBC News. It got on Have I Got News For You? But look, in terms of mission awareness and issue awareness, it was great. You could spend £5 million on a TV campaign to do that, and but we will take the learnings from that, and maybe we bring it back next year, and maybe we'll
put it at number 24. That'll be like ultimate uproar. But that'd be meltdown. But that's the thing. Like it's the fact, as you said, like it was probably like a small campaign to run, but the fact that you had so much publicity off the back of it, and I'd imagine in your response to the criticism, you were able to say, well, actually, these are the reasons why. And then people that are listening to that maybe have not heard of your brand before, like that then subsequently triggers alignment in their eyes that go, well, actually, no, I believe in that, and now I'm going to start buying Tony's. So, yeah, like not every thing that people look at as a mistake is actually a mistake.
Yeah, we had, I mean, literally the day 8 Mageddon, day 9, we had so many phone calls. I think 1,500 phone calls, so 1,500 emails on it, and the team, our Choco Fan Care team in the UK, were kept very, very busy. But 95% of the people that they spoke to went away after they were outraged when they got in contact. 95% of the people went away as stronger advocates after we've explained why we did what we did. They got it. In balance, it was a great thing, and I don't know how many businesses could do that, but creates a bit of work, but it serves a purpose.
Exactly, right? It's a bittersweet story, and yeah, talking of bitter, it's maybe a good idea to actually bring back into focus the book that you guys have written, because I think when you're kind of looking into that, then okay, it's amazing that we see these cool brands trying to do different things to others, and the taste is that's the main part of what sells your product. But actually, when you read more into the book and the people's stories, I think that's important as well.
I mean, the truth of it is, there's chocolate is a delicious, sweet tasting product, but at the beginning of the value chain there's a very bitter story. And so I think about 4 years ago now we launched a book called Bitter, which are the stories of children who were former child slaves or kept in effectively modern day slavery on cocoa farms, and it's basically their story and what happened, and also what they're up to now. we did an exhibition in Amsterdam and also in Germany, and yeah, there was 500,000 visitors, and it just enables us to talk about the stories and why we do what we do.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think we kind of touched upon it earlier, but like impact in my eyes is the very essence of purpose, and profit doesn't have to be impacted by progress, and the progress that you're making around individuals is the crux to your story, right? So yeah, we're very early in your journey, and I'd imagine if we spoke again in 5 years' time, there'd be an awful lot of positive progress that's taken place. You'll probably get a little bit of flack here and there, but like, it doesn't really matter, because ultimately what you're trying to do is really important, and it's going to, if you can uplift a lot of people out of poverty and allow them to kind of support their lives, their livelihoods, their families, create value within the total value chain. If you're able to change an industry that's quite archaic in respect to its practices, then all the value to you. So I'm really encouraged by what you guys are trying to achieve, and I'm keen to see where you are in a couple of years' time.
Oh, me too, man. I mean, there is so much money in chocolate and the chocolate industry. If you just go on and Google and you look at Mondelez, who own Cadbury's and Green and Blacks, and then you go on and look at Hershey, you will see they are the companies that have some of the highest operating margins in the world. You're talking high teens, low 20s. And so we estimate the cocoa market, the worldwide chocolate market, is worth over $100 billion, and it would take probably about 1% of that to enable all the farmers to earn a living income. So there is more than enough money there. It's about choices, and we want those companies to start making the right choice and actively stop exploiting. But a lot of it is about awareness, and they will continue to get away with what they can get away with, no matter what they say. And this isn't me being pious or kind of preachy. It's fact. 20 years ago, they promised that they would eradicate slavery and child labour from their cocoa chains. 20 years later, the numbers are exactly the same. So they are just kicking the can down the road. And I'd urge everyone to start looking into, all of your listeners to look into, which I know they will, what they're buying, and be curious on value chains and sourcing and the history of the products. But don't just take the company's answer for it. Be curious and challenge and push, because that's what it's going to take. And there was a recent dispatches program about 6 weeks ago in the UK on that very issue of child labour in Cadbury's value chain.
I guess the only reason why companies aren't changing is because not enough of their consumers are forcing change upon them. So the key part of any change is accountability. You can be transparent to what you're doing in your company, and I think that transparency is key. But ultimately, from a consumer's perspective, it's equally important that we hold our companies, our leaders, accountable for their actions, because that is how ultimately change can be delivered. So there's an awful lot we can do, but accountability and transparency are key. One thing I'm trying to do now going forward is loop into our next guest, so and also our audience as well, by way of a recommendation. So I'm a massive reader, so if there's a book that you would recommend people read, that you would encourage people go to, or if there's a film to watch, or if there's a question you specifically want to ask our future guest, now is the time.
I would say that there's couple of things to watch. The first is a series on Netflix called Rotten. It's really interesting. It delves into supply chains of common problems. And series 2, episode 5 is all about cocoa. It even features Tony's in there, and that's an independent documentary. It's really interesting as well. They go into the issues with avocados as well. And so all of that, I think, it's fascinating and will be really interesting to your listeners. And then if people can seek it out and want to learn more, this is me being totally self-indulgent, because this is just about Tony's, and that is it's called The Chocolate Case. It used to be on Amazon, but it's come off. But it's called The Chocolate Case, and it's all about the story of, again, Tony's and some of the challenges we faced, how we've got around them or not, as the case may be. So 2 things: Rotten on Netflix, and then The Chocolate Case, if you can find it.
I like to finish with like a closing thought, a lasting message that you'd like to leave with them. On the basis of what we discussed and what you're trying to achieve, what would you like to tell our audience?
That I hope, people have listened to this. And so once, my job, my team's job is to raise awareness of these problems. And once you can't unknow. And ultimately, we need people to share that story. And I would love listeners to share that story and ultimately spread the word. People have a choice, and every day we make choices when we're at the fixture, and all of those choices are effectively a vote for the type of world we want to live in. So help us to change the industry, and then help us to challenge us, help us to raise our game as well. We can't do it alone.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Purpose Made podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to Purpose Made wherever you normally get your podcasts to hear the latest news and views. You can also find and follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn and Twitter, or contact Peter directly to connect, inquire about Purpose Made, or request to be featured on the podcast. We look forward to welcoming you back soon for another episode.